Welcome everyone, and many thanks for supporting our online talks. If you missed any of the first three, you can catch up with them on the library's YouTube channel, which is youtube.com/WCM Library. They're going very well on YouTube and we're really pleased about that. Today's talk will be uploaded there shortly too. Welcome particularly to our speaker today, who's Kevin Morgan, Professor of Politics and Contemporary History at the University of Manchester and a trustee of the Working Class Movement Library. And he's going to talk to us on the right to our own time and energy, 130 years of May Day. Our talks are, as usual, free. However, we would like to encourage you to support the library if you're able to do so, while acknowledging that there will be many other demands on your funds. Thank you very much to those of you who, after last week's talk, did send across a donation. It was noted and it was appreciated. So the page to click to is wcml.org.uk/donate. So we will start Kevin's presentation.
Okay. And are you going into slides? Yep. Okay. Okay. Thanks, Lynette, and thanks to everybody for listening in. And probably what I should start by saying is that I'm not any sort of expert on the history of May Day, and I've never really researched May Day as such. But when I was asked to give a talk on a similar subject a few years ago, two things struck me really. One was that you couldn't research the history of the labour movements over the last century or so without continuously coming across May Day and what it had represented in the history of the movement. So in that sense, you found out that you probably knew a bit more than you'd thought you knew. And the other thing, which I think was really odd in a way, is that I couldn't find any sort of decent history of May Day in English. There are some examples, I'll show you in the next slide. There are examples in French and in other languages, most of which I don't actually read anyway, but there seems to be a sort of gap there because it's such an important symbol and event in the history of the movement. And yet hasn't, there's lots of pamphlets and there's a very interesting piece that Eric Hobsbawm published in the early 90s, which you can find on the Tribune website. Tribune put it out again about a year ago, but nothing bigger than that. So what I thought I'd do today in the half an hour or so that I have is just to give an overview of some of the themes and dilemmas that May Day has posed in the past and perhaps still continue to pose us in the present. So I'm starting there. Let's say 130 years of May Day, that's going back to 1890, because that's the first year in which May Day was marked as an international day on which workers would demonstrate across the parties of the Second International, which had been re-established the previous year. You could trace May Day back a few years back before that to the Haymarket Affair and the Haymarket Martyrs in Chicago, but essentially it's May Day as an international day of struggle and commemoration that I'm interested in. And just finally, that image there is one of a number of images that I will be showing over the next few minutes by Walter Crane, the associate of William Morris and others, as you can see from the style of art. I'm sure loads of you are familiar with Crane's art. And that was one, actually he did, it was on the second May Day, that's 1891. But lots of his images, as we'll see, were not only familiar in this country, but across the international in those early years. So next slide, please, Lynette. In fact, I just want to rush past that one, but that's just an indication. In France, for example, there are these three really excellent books on May Day. They're written mostly by people associated with the French Communist Party, with the CGT Union Confederation, and actually I've lent on those quite heavily for some of the things I'm talking about today. But next slide, please, Lynette. Okay, so yeah, so the Second International had been founded in 1889 in Paris, and there was the resolution was taken that the following May there should be an international day of demonstrations, and that it would initially focus on the issue of the 8-hour day. And so in this country, it was the 8 Hours League that was a major hand in organising these demonstrations in London in 1890. And one of the points that Hobsbawm makes in his piece that he wrote is that at that point nobody was, I think, really anticipating that this would become a sort of fixture in the labour movement calendar that it did become. But nevertheless, it sort of tapped in to a huge response at the time. I suppose, remember, this is the time of the new Unionism. There's been major industrial conflict, a lot of it centred on London over the previous year, and the demonstrations in Hyde Park. There are several platforms, international speakers, lots of familiar, Eleanor Marx, Bernard Shaw, George Lansbury, George Lansbury's there, the anarchist Stepniak. The whole gamut of opinion across the labour movement is represented across these platforms, and estimated turnout of up to 300,000. And there you can see, actually, the illustration, certainly the one on the left, that's from the Illustrated London News in 1891, because by 1891, the Illustrated London News knows they need to have somebody covering this. There hadn't been the sort of expectation that it would be such an event in 1890 itself. And there's Eleanor Marx, who speaks from one of the platforms. I can remember he came in handfuls of a few dozen to Hyde Park to demand an 8 hours bill, but the dozens have grown to hundreds, and the hundreds to thousands, until with this magnificent demonstration that fills the park today. And Engels, he also, in a letter to Agus Babel, the German Social Democrats, says that it was a sort of nothing short of overwhelming, is the phrase that he uses, all in all the most gigantic meeting that had ever been held here. So you're going back to the days of the Chartists, I suppose, to have what we could think of as sort of labour movement demonstration of this scale. There's Engels again, if only Marx was still by my side to see this. So it poses the question of, why did May Day take off in this way? Why did it become such a fixture? I suppose it makes us ask questions about the power of symbols in politics and why May Day became such a symbol of struggle. Next slide, please. So I'm going to pick out 3 or 4 reasons of why I think that May Day did have this significance for the movement, and help to explain the mobilizations that not just there in 1890, but at various key moments. You could think of what would be examples. I'll talk about the one in 1937 in this country, or you could think of 1926, immediately before the general strike. Why May Day becomes this, this focus. I'm going to think of, essentially, I suppose what I'm going to talk about today is 3 or 4 reasons why that might have been the case. I'm going to talk about ideas of unity, international solidarity, and this theme that I flagged up in the title, the claim to our own time and energy. I'm going to talk about those themes and also the possible tensions between them. So, but first I would just, because I'm going to come back to this point, that I start off with one which is the claim to the future. And I'm quoting here Alf Purcell, A.A. Purcell, big figure in the movement in Manchester and Salford Trades Council, also a prominent international figure in the 1920s and on the TUC General Council at the time of this article he wrote in 1925. He only briefly passed through the Communist Party, but he was the sort of figure that was, he supported virtually every sort of militant cause he could find. I wrote a book about him at the urging of Eddie and Ruth Frau, and it took me ages to write because you had to dig about all over the place because he was involved in so many movements. But at this point, you could say that he was the leading TUC left, I suppose, in 1925. And this is Purcell on May Day. In the course of history, In the course of history, all of the classes have celebrated their victories after the event. The festivals they established are in honour and in memory of their past. It's only the working class which, while still fettered, has dared to declare this holiday as a token of an emancipation which yet lies in the future. As long as our fetters remain, May Day must for us be a day of struggle. And I'm going to come back to Purcell and what he thought was so important about May Day and how we might look at that now, right towards the end of the talk. But I'll come back to that. I'll go on to these three other points I mentioned. Lynette, with the next slide, please. So the first point is unity, you know, to get this sort of turnout in Hyde Park, to mobilize about what was a very simple and straightforward demand, namely the 8-hour day, which there was some in the sort of Socialist League, which sort of William Morris was drawing back from and was moving in a sort of slightly anarchist direction. They weren't too, they thought it was just a palliative that you needn't necessarily bother with. But by and large, the 8-hour day was a demand around which you could unite the entire movement. So I've just given a few examples there. You know, the Fabian Society was supporting it, but so that second image from the left with the Wobblies. There's Keir Hardie has got it amongst his demands in the 1890s. So, and there's Engels again, one army under one flag and fighting for one immediate aim. So one compelling thing was this sense of unity, which, if I can come to the next slide. Yeah, the unity, but that sense of unity across national borders. So there's another of these sort of wonderful images by Walter Crane. And this, I've obviously not interviewed anybody from the 1890s. I've interviewed quite a few people from the 1920s and 30s, and describing this sense of, I don't know, it's sort of the fact that you're moving at one with those who are sharing your commitments right across the world. This sense of internationalism being expressed through the way that you demonstrate on May Day was quite a powerful sense of attachment to that as a symbol. And some people who've looked at Germany in between the wars and have interviewed people about working class activists about, you know, how important a moment it was in the kind of them. And it was totally bound up with this sense of the solidarity of labour across national boundaries. And one, it's just a sign of that in a way. Lynette, if we could come to the next slide, please. It's just the way that these images of Crane, they become internationalized. Everybody picks up those are, I think the one on the left is German, the one on the right is Swedish, but this sense, so, you know, Engels is talking about one army with one immediate aim, and almost like one set of symbols, one iconography, this sense of an international mobilization, very powerful in that period. So that's the second point I would make. And the third one is this point about our own time and energy. If we can come to the next slide. So this is the point about May Day, and we're going to see this is one of the possible lines of division there, but the point about May Day was actually a stoppage of work on May the 1st, and that the importance of the demonstration was bound up into that. So these are the look, that's the Communist Party in this country, how it expresses it in 1923, a visible demonstration of the workers, not only to the capitalists, but to themselves, that society depends upon their own force every day and every minute. And if they stop, all the life and work of the world stops. So there is sort of May Day as a day of struggle, but also as a sense of affirmation, you know, of labourers as the source of all wealth, as you know, the basic socialist precept, and the striving for the emancipation of labour. There's one, the London May 1st Committee went back to the 1890s. By 1936, it essentially, I mean, the person who wrote that is probably a communist called John Mahon. And look at the language that he's using as well. May Day is a day of challenge. The bondage that capitalism exercises over the masses of the people is defied. The wage slave asserts the right to his own time and energy. The jingo nationalism of the capitalist government is set aside by the call to international solidarity and by the fraternity of class that knows no barrier of race or creed. So you've got the internationalism there again, but this is quite interesting. It's quite unusual actually I mean, Mann was quite an orthodox communist for using that sort of language in the mid-30s, the wage slave asserting the right to his own time and energy. And I've thought about why he should be doing that. Interestingly, he, as I say, he was certainly a sort of party loyalist. His father had been a close associate of Morris and others in the Socialist League. So where there's almost like a sort of an inherited legacy there that's expressed, I don't know. But so the London May 1st Committee, which, as I say, is predominantly the communists and people working with the communists at that period, the idea would be May Day has to mean May the 1st. It doesn't mean the first Sunday in May. If you come to the next slide, please. So that is maybe is the potential line of tension there, and maybe it's always been there from the start. So there's an example from a sort of French satirical left paper from before the First World War. That's the La Grève is the strike. And that's its May Day issue. And in France, May Day was bound up with sometimes quite violent, confrontational forms of conflict with the state, with the employers. So this idea of May Day as a sort of a day where you threw down the gauntlet, at least for that day. To capitalism and to the employing class. That means on the right, that means sort of May celebration, I think. But as you can see, it's not like a celebration in the sense of maypoles and so on. It's very much that image of defiant struggle. And the tension there is that I started with that demonstration in Hyde Park in 1890, this huge demonstration. That wasn't on a working day, and you couldn't have had a demonstration of that size on the working day. So those who took the main hand in this country decided that actually use the first Sunday in May. And so there was always that issue, I suppose, between unity and between that combative militancy, where you got fewer participants. And so the London May 1st Committee in 1936 wouldn't be able to organise huge demonstrations, nothing like on the scale that I talked about in 1890. And I'm going to come back to how they squared that circle in just a moment. But next slide, please, Lynette. But I'm going to come to how those tensions do become quite destructive in a way, and one example of how they're very destructive, another example of how they're overcome. But in a sense, remember Purcell, he'd been talking about, that moment where in a sense we take ownership of our own future. Well, 1917 and the Russian Revolution had represented that. And in particular, May Day is really at the center of the remaking of the Soviet calendar. I suppose you could say second only to November the 7th as the anniversary of the revolution, but May Day had always had this distinctive international message. So there was the celebration of the Russian Revolution, and there was this reaffirmation of internationalism on May the 1st. A couple of images that I've used there, but there are dozens and dozens of images that you can find. This new it's almost like this big creative moment, isn't it? The Russian Revolution in the first few years, and how it's expressed in poster art and so on. Come to the next slide, please, Lynette, for another example. And May Day and the International, the Communist International, founded in 1919. The first issue of the Communist International comes out actually on May Day. And as another image I should have remembered to use, but I didn't, that expresses that sense of internationalism striving for emancipation. So I'm not going to deal so much with that Soviet side of it. That would be a sort of story in its own right. I will just, if we can come to the next slide, please, Lynette. It does, it becomes, as we know in a way, more in the nature of a state holiday, and the nature of the demonstrations change in the USSR. So that one at the top is at 1919, and you can see the elements of spontaneity, almost elements of carnival overspilling there, and then you can see the books of the images, the floats that were made, the banners and so on. There is this great overflowing of revolutionary energy in a way. 1929, I've thought since when I just looked at these slides, is that November the 7th or May Day? And I ought to have checked, but anyway, you get the sense of it's more hierarchical. There's more of a sense of the leadership isn't part of the demonstration. You sort of march past them. And I didn't think of this when I put it up, but I thought afterwards that one in Leningrad in 1932, that must be one of the first socially distancing demonstrations in history by the looks of it. But I think that, it's that there were those traditions, not just in Soviet Russia, but in some of the European social democratic parties, for more sort of slightly regimented styles of manifestation. But that's a separate story one could go into. More interested in those movements in other parts of the world that aren't yet in control of the state. So if you come into the next slide, please. And there I mentioned this issue. It's a sense the issue of unity, and it's the issue of struggle, and are there sometimes tensions there? And as far as the communists are concerned, and these are the French communists, the whole point of May Day is it has to be that day of challenge, and it has to involve the stoppage of work. So in that sense, they are remaining true to that original ideal of May Day. And so that's, I'm not sure the exact year, it's going to be late 20s or early 30s, but show me a manifesto. That basically means take a holiday and demonstrate. And above it, he says, close down the factories and workshops. So the whole point is that it has to be this militant industrial action. In parts of the social democracy in the interwar period, they're not interested in that at all. And in one particular case, it leads to sort of really tragic divisions. If we can come to the next slide, please. That's in Germany, where you've got the sharpest divisions between the Communist Party, which is the biggest mass communist party in Europe, and the Social Democratic Party, which is also, along with the Labour Party here, one of the, the key social democratic parties in Europe, and the one in Austria, of course. But there is this, for all sorts of reasons, can't go into here, these bitter tensions between them. And these are expressed particularly on May Day 1929, where the Social Democrats basically control Prussia. There is a Social Democratic police chief who bans open air meetings. He's defied by the communists who see this as a way of making a stand against social democracy in this period. There is violence in Berlin, 30 demonstrators or something like that are killed, and it just intensifies the tensions within the left between social democracy and communism. That book on the right, which we've got in the library, is that's by a sort of communist proletarian writer, and it's all centers on these events of May Day 1929, and bitter sectarian internal conflict between the left. You couldn't say that there are any winners in this. There are only losers, because, as we all know, it's sort of a catastrophic outcome to those tensions is that the only winner basically is fascism. And if you come to the next slide, please. Moving on 4 years later, the second country that actually institutionalizes May the 1st as a sort of workers' holiday, which is a sort of provocation, but it's Nazi Germany. Immediately, in the months immediately after the Nazis' accession to power in Germany in January 1933. And the following day, there's the suppression of the labour movement, the absolutely unbelievable passivity, really, of trade union leaders, and there's that sort of appropriation of the symbols of the left and of the labour movements by their worst and most destructive enemies. So that's one. That's a sort of, it could be a cautionary tale, if you like, but of course the whole left, in a sense, mobilizes thereafter around the issue of anti-fascism. And it's a great stimulus to the left in countries like France and Britain. And so May Day is also at the center of that. So if we can come to the next slide, please. So on the left, you've got the CGT. CGT is the United French Trade Union Confederation, and so you can see that's clearly 1st of May 1936. They don't have the dilemmas of the left here, how you negotiate that, and so May Day as a symbol of struggle. And those are images on the right from this country. That's the 1936 May Day demonstration in London. There's also a fantastic book. It's a bit like Barricades in Berlin. Well, if you're after an equivalent here, it'd be this book, May Day by John Summerfield, who afterwards fights in Spain and writes a book about that. And we haven't got that book in the library, which is terrible. So I'm going to have to donate my copy. It's got Andy Croft has done a really interesting introduction to it, and that all centers on May Day as this, it's this sort of panoramic view of working class struggle, and it all pulls together on the May Day demonstration that he imagines. It's not a real event that he's describing. So May Day still has this important pull for the left. How do you reconcile those issues of unity and that sort of stoppage of work? Well, in a way, you square the circle here, because in 1937, May Day falls on a Sunday, so there's no dilemma. And John Saville, the famous Labour historian, he wrote an essay around that. He was a young student at the LSE in 1937, and he evokes that sense again of this massive demonstration that you have in London in May Day at that time. Now, this is the point. Lynette, what should we do about the film?
I'll give it a go if Jane will just pause the review.
So next slide, please. So essentially you get what is far worse than seeing those images. So it was the sort of workers' film movement, and they took images. They filmed the May Day demonstration. It was the same time as the coronation, and this was the sort of counter demonstrations of the coronation. Started the London bus workers' strike, so you can see the bus workers in their uniforms marching there. Lots of images of, at this time, the Spanish Civil War. And again, you get a sense of a really large demonstration and all the different sections of the movement represented there. So, so May Day, that was, as I say, that was the year of probably the biggest May Day demonstration you'd had for a while here, because this was the time of unity against fascism, unity against the national government, obviously support for the Republic in Spain, and by it falling on a Sunday, everybody had mobilized at the same time. So I'm just going to, can I just ask Lynette, how long have I got left?
About 5 minutes.
That's fine. So moving towards a conclusion then, and what became of May Day since then, and where we might be now with it. I put Festival of Work or Capitalism because, again, you've got these are sort of contested symbols, and they can be appropriated by those who have no right to them at all. So these are images from France during the years of the occupation of the Vichy regime, and the one on the left is Pétain, at the Marshal Pétain at the head of the Vichy regime in 1941, institutes again a fête de travail, a sort of festival of labour. He's saying that I keep to my promises, even other, even promises of others. A sort of widely cited thing that he had said as in part of this collaborationist regime with the Nazis. The image on the left, I don't know how clearly you can make that out, but that is coming out of the PCF, the French Communist Party, and the French Resistance. And you can see how, again, it's so it's been published illegally. That's why the poor quality, obviously, and this holding on to May Day as a symbol of the movement against those, whether the Nazi regime, whether the Vichy regime in France, that would appropriate those symbols. So a battle around May Day as a symbol. And in this country, if we can come to the next slide, and those images, in the library, May Day, of course, remains a continuing tradition, and does so, throughout the decades to come. And you can see that image on the left from 1945, how it's, it's still that sense of particularly expressing internationalism. The idea of, at that point, it's the liberation from fascism in 1945. But probably never has, I would say, quite the same force that I know of. I mean, others may know of other examples that I'm not even aware of. And I must admit, most of my research has been on earlier periods, but I don't think it has the same force in the post-war decade as it had in, say, 1937 or 1926 or 1890. And you can see on the program there that they're meeting on May the 6th. No one at that point. That idea of, all out on May the 1st, that has gone. And that's from the early 1970s, isn't it? That's Music Party for May Day. One thing that happens under the Wilson-Callaghan governments in 1978, I think, is that I don't want to compare the Wilson-Callaghan governments with Marshal Pétain or anything like that, but we also get a state bank holiday, like most other countries. It brings us into line with the rest of most of Europe, in fact. And if I can come on to the next slide, please. I think that perhaps poses a question in terms of the meanings that May Day had. So I've gone back here to A.A. Purcell in 1925, and you can see the language that he's using. This isn't something that he would necessarily have welcomed. To turn May Day into a bank holiday would be equally to destroy its meaning. May Day can only become a statutory holiday when labour rules, when the purpose of May Day is achieved, and when the workers are no longer looking forward to their emancipation, but looking back on their epoch of victory. So he obviously would have rejected, a fascist and reactionary regimes introducing some sort of Labour Day. But he's, as far as he's concerned, and perhaps that generation of socialists were concerned, May Day would become almost, hollowed out by it just becoming another bank holiday. And in a sense, that's how Hobsbawm is writing about it in this, this really interesting piece he writes in the 90s. For most people, even in labour movements, May Day now evokes the past more than the present. It's not that there aren't people, because we know that people do mark it, but it's become more of a minority thing, and it isn't really threatening anybody in the way that it may once have. And so where that leaves us now with May Day, does that mean, we don't care whether we have it or not? If we can come to the next slide, which is the penultimate slide, May Day in Britain, the attack on a tradition. It, in a sense, it does represent some sort of achievement, because we know this year, which is, I think, the second time it's happened, isn't it? Okay, we can just, it's dispensable. We can have VE Day instead. And actually over the last few years, at different times, there have been Tories of one type or another suggesting either Trafalgar Day was this idea at one point, or some sort of Independence Day, you know, with the whole sort of Brexit thing. Perhaps we'll have Boris Johnson's baby day, somebody will be proposing in the next few days, but some way in which some alternative holiday will be offered instead of it, which we don't want. So in that sense, it does represent a gain. But as I say, I think it's, in one sense, I'll come to this as my concluding point, it doesn't seem to have this, or it didn't, I should say, didn't seem to have the same meaning that it once had. But to come to the very final slide then, please. The one thing, so when I did this talk a few years ago, and I was, you know, hastily looking around on catalogues and so on to see what I could find to read about it, and there was lots of material from the earlier period up to about, I suppose, the 1940s that you could find. Yeah, so not sort of histories of May Day, but pamphlets were put out that would be talking about May Day in the context of the movement and so on. And then it seemed to fade away considerably, but then a massive revival with the sort of anti-capitalist, anti-globalization movements of recent years. And I thought interesting in a way, because particularly a lot of this stuff coming from the US, in fact. And it's interesting, I suppose, partly because that takes us, you know, if you go back to the Haymarket Martyrs, it sort of squares the circle, and we're back in the USA, which doesn't always happen if you're talking about issues of sort of militant labor history. But there's also the fact that actually the USA is a country that doesn't recognise May Day or as a labour holiday. And so it has become a symbol of struggle. There's the reuse of an image from the Italian Socialist Party that's been reused by more recent movements. But there was, if you go onto the internet, there's any number of images and text that you can find from more recent years, but not just in the USA. For example, I forget the year now, the early 2000s, a really massive demonstration in Paris against Le Pen and the challenge posed by the Front National. And that was a May the 1st demonstration. So it's not to say that, you know, that this has gone, it's irrecoverable. It's just, in a sense, all I'm doing is tracing a history, which was a symbol that had meant a huge amount to the movement, in a sense, almost to some extent as a victim of a partial degree of success. It had become less important as a symbol, but perhaps is one that we can still turn back to now, and clearly movements are still doing that. And I'll end there.
Okay, thank you very much indeed, Kevin. I'll draw people's attention to the reaction button at the bottom. If you want to join in a virtual round of applause, now is a good moment to do that. Or thumbs ups indeed. Thank you very much, folks. That's good to see, and smiles good. Oh, an actual silent but visible applause. That's also good. Yeah, lovely. Okay, thank you. So we have also got the chat function running, as we said before. So if you click on that chat button at the bottom, if you want to ask a question, we will run a Q&A. And so if you type in a question, Kevin can see it. And if you could just read out the question, Kevin, and then respond to it, then we'll see how we go with that. So we've got it. I guess I'm sorry about there were for some reason there were some problems with the voice at the beginning. I don't know what happened with Kevin. You slightly turned into a Dalek, but it seemed to be better when I switched myself off mute. So I kept myself off mute. So I hope, folks, I wasn't sort of breathing too heavily into that. I usually keep myself out of it, but that seemed to make it better for some reason.
I do that anyway sometimes. That wasn't necessarily the computer. So we've got some a reminiscence from Alan from South Wales there. I'm not going to try and pronounce that name. If I could find Alan to unmute him, I'd tell him to. Where is it? If I can find Alan. There's so many of you. It's great, but I can't find him now. Otherwise, shall I read out that one?
But yeah, well, are you going to be able to pronounce the
no.
The name? Oh, there you go. You see.
but I will do my best. If Alan will forgive
yeah,
me.
go for it. Go for it.
So, okay, so that was, I read the Inistu school logbook 40 years ago. It recorded the first time local miners kept their kids for school for May Day holiday. Exactly, buried deep in my notes, but precisely dates when miners there took the day off, probably early 1900s, which I think is really interesting in terms of you keep your children off school. And actually thinking about that, Alan, in terms of how, like at the turn of the century, and actually not that turn of the century, into the interwar years, I've interviewed activists from the 30s whose parents would keep them away from school because of Empire Day. And there was this sort of, forced conformism with certain things that you should be part of, and that they wouldn't go to school at that on Empire Day. And this sounds like it's similar in a way, but another form of demonstrative action that your children should also support May Day. Okay, the question I organise from Jack, I organised Salford's annual May Day for the last few years. Do you still see a value in holding May Day parades? And I would say probably the answer is yes, because I go along to, in Salford, I've actually gone along to ones in Birmingham, but I must say the ones that I know of, they've been of a different type. It's almost like a get-togethering of people quite often that you would know. They're not quite the same. I don't know about in Salford and what the involvement is. So I would certainly say yes. But then I think if you're thinking the way that Purcell was talking in terms of what would be that day of challenge, I think things. I also think that I don't think you could imagine May Day quite as it had once been, but I think like the importance of industrial action and as sort of strike activity as a way of sort of as a sort of self-affirmation, like that laying claim to your own time and energy. I think that is a great idea.
Jack's follow-up point, our aim is to raise awareness of trade unionism due to such low knowledge of trade unions nowadays.
That Jack has said, yeah?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So I mean, it's it's like saying have a talk like this, or there's lots of things that we do that might not be quite that we should be doing. So, but I still think that's not, that's a symbol that's come to mean something. But it's still a bit different from what we're talking about in that earlier period. So I think, I was just thinking, I mean, this is just as a sort of personal note. Actually, when John Mann and people like that are saying, we're going to stake claim to our own time and energy. I work as Lynette said, I've worked in the same university department for nearly 30 years. But the last couple of years, we've had for the first time sort of what I would call actual strikes that have gone on for a period of time with pickets over 2 or 3 weeks and so on. And they've had such an important, I would say, of really good effect in terms of the whole morale of the place, people's willingness to challenge things. So I think that aspect of challenge is something that in a sense May Day was meant to encapsulate. I don't know how you would recapture that. Haymarket Margaret is asking, thanks. You hadn't heard of the Haymarket Martyrs before. Please, could you explain? I can explain to a degree, but I bet you there are more than one person here who knows more about it than I do. But essentially, it was about 8-hour day in Chicago in 1886. But the Haymarket affair, there was, I think there's a bomb went off, and there were fatalities there. And in a sense, why it came to have this resonance for the labour movement internationally was basically there was a group of anarchists that were essentially framed for it. And so it's a bit like the, Sacco and Vanzetti in the Sacco and Vanzetti in the 20s, or Angela Davis later on, or Dimitrov. They became a sort of symbol for the movement internationally. And they are the Haymarket Martyrs. And so it was definitely the case, you know, at the time of the first May Day, socialists were very much aware of the example of the Hay, you know, that they were sort of looking to the Haymarket martyrs and to that extent to the American example in that spirit of solidarity. But that, as I say, somebody else would answer that better question much better than I did. Okay, that's interesting. Biddy is saying, it struck me that this was the second revival of May Day, as it was originally a pagan festival celebrated in spring. On Christmas, it was considered by Oliver Cromwell as a festival that should be removed. And I suppose, so definitely, I mean, that is true. And it's quite, it's interesting that John Mahon and the May Day committee in the 1930s, if I remember rightly, because this is a sort of popular front period, and actually, if you could have seen that footage that we didn't see, you know, they're carrying placards with sort of Spanish leaders of the Spanish democracy and so on. There's also a placard about Wat Tyler and the Peasants' Revolt. So they've got this sense of this long march of English history that is being continued by the marches on May Day 1937. So in one of the later versions of those pamphlets, later in the 30s, they do actually sort of locate May Day within sort of whatever you'd call it, English history, English folk traditions and so on, but and now it's being reclaimed by the modern labour movements. So actually the pamphlets I'm referring to did more justice to that than I did. So yeah, absolutely. Well, that's so. This is Gordon to everyone. I was saying well, I'll read out what Gordon said first. Particularly the trade unions, keep the May Day bank holidays as support it could have done. We still have celebrations, e.g. the Durham Miners Gala and Tolpuddle Martyrs, but not May Day debate. And we were saying earlier that actually this is the sort of topic, I know from having spoken it once before, it generated sort of more debate than questions, actually, because people would have different views on it. And yeah, I would say absolutely. I've never actually been to the Durham Miners Gala. I've been to the Tolpuddle once or twice, and that's more like, I suppose there again there would be the issue, because that as a sort of festival of the movement, there's no question of that, but that's still it's important that you need to have things like that, and that because, you know, it's just in terms of it sustains a movement, exchange of ideas, debates, and all the other things that go on, but it's still slightly different from that May Day as a challenge to the rights of capital and such in that direct sense. Particularly Tolpuddle, because not particularly Tolpuddle, but because one has gone, you know, out into Dorset and so on. It's not necessarily, it's not the same as assembling 300,000 people in the middle of London in terms of how it impacts. Okay, so why was Luxembourg's picture on the Nazi parade, were they responsible for hers and Liebknecht's death? So that I should have explained, actually rushing through that slide. So that so the Nazis, you know, as I say, they sort of appropriated Labour Day directly before then suppressing the Labour movements the following day. And it was part of this sort of ersatz National Socialist aspect of what Nazism was all about. That picture that I showed you was actually I think it's Karl Liebknecht House in Berlin. So that was actually the headquarters. So the reason you could see about Rosa Luxemburg on there, that was the headquarters of the German Communist Party. And this was in a sense, the Nazi assault on all the institutions of the labor movement and the left. And so that was, in a sense, you know, whatever view one comes of these conflicts in 1929, the great tragedy of it was that communists and social democrats were so deeply divided, and in a sense, however one apportions responsibility for that, it was the Nazis who benefited from that, and you got the 12 years of Nazism. So that I should have you know, that I should have indicated that better. So that building you could see was actually the headquarters of the German Communist Party, the Nazis suppressing the labour movement. Diane asking, perhaps a Tory attack on May Day would be helpful in showing the workers who voted for it. It says Boris, I would never call him Boris Johnson, that it was perhaps a mistake. Remind them of historical struggles with the Conservative class and how they're really viewed, which I think is an interest. You know, it did strike me where, you know, all these, how May Day is being used by sort of younger activists in the States in this way. And I suppose, you know, what a Tory attack on it will come or it won't come, but it can be, it's like the, you know, like that. I suppose the last sort of anti-trade union legislation, which was meant to stop any sort of industrial actions, but in some ways actually responded to engaging with that. People worked much harder to get a balance for industrial actions and so on, so that if that's what happens, one can engage with it and maybe, who knows? I mean, if it would, you know, it would be something to fight, to defend. I don't think a few years ago, I'm not so sure it's been so much recently, but there seems to be quite a lot about this idea of a Trafalgar Day and such. I'm not sure, perhaps I don't follow the right newspapers or whatever it was. I've not seen so much of that recently. Suzanne, do you think May Day will morph into a digital festival in the near future? At the moment, I can only speak as sort of teaching and things like this. It seems that everything is morphing into a digital festival. And so whether, I don't know. I mean, whether that means, because again, it's like one of these challenges that just at the minute we have, whether we like it or not, and the ways that people are thinking of creative ways of actually doing things that they have, or to communicate in ways that they haven't before. And so if that's what the situation confronts with you, maybe that is one of the things. If you could imagine about that sort of across international boundaries and so on, maybe if we just think in terms of the library, you know, that actually the idea that you could be giving a talk now and there's no reason why people might be being part of the discussion for wherever they might be, that's something we, in a sense, we haven't thought about before. So maybe there are opportunities there. And okay, Hannah says the Whitworth have a study by, I didn't know this, it's on display, Lucian Pissarro of the 1892 May Day Parade in Hyde Park, drawn as a study for the Illustrated London News, possibly slightly emotionless drawing, but does show the enormity of the event. So if that's in the Whitworth when that reopens, could go and have a look. And Peter, to everyone, Margaret, the Haymarket Affair in May 86 was a demonstration in Chicago for an 8-hour day that turned violent. And there is there's a Manchester virtual May Day festival this weekend, and there's a link here. Can other people see these that I'm looking at, Lynette?
Yeah.
So that
copy that
on the 2nd of May. On the 2nd of May.
That we put a link, if you get our e-bulletin, that link was in our e-bulletin, which went out on Monday as well. So, but yeah, copy that now if you can, if you want to.
And there's other links here, yeah.
But another one, yeah, Scottish to you. So thanks, Anne. I did try your other link while you've been talking, Kevin. I tried your link to your film again, and you do need to be part of the University of Manchester. You need the University of Manchester login, etc., to get in there. So that's why I wasn't doing it, and I think therefore any of you are University of Manchester alumni, you'll be in luck. But otherwise, we'll see if we can find another way to show that clip, which sounded good, but it's not going to be possible today, I'm afraid. Okay, any further questions? Any last or contributions from anybody? Good to know that there are still May Day events going on, even if not on the 1st of May, as historically we know it should be. Okay, we're getting nothing more in the chat. So I will wind up with a big thank you again to Kevin, and just to let everybody know that we will be doing the same again next week. Our talks used to be fortnightly. We're trying to move them to weekly. So big thanks again to Kevin for stepping in with this, which wasn't in our original programme. We're back next week to what was in our original programme, a talk by Alison Fell from the University of Leeds, and it's called The Legacies of Wartime Strikes, Interwar Women Trade Union Leaders in France and Britain. You can read more about that on the events page on our website. And as I said earlier, this talk has been recorded and it's going to be uploaded along with the others which are already there on our YouTube channel, which is youtube.com/WCM Library. And again, just a reminder that our talks are, as usual, free, but if you do feel able to send us a donation, we'd be really very grateful. And there's a donate button on our website that you can use. So I would just like to say thanks again to Kevin and to everybody else for turning up. There's some faces that I'm recognising as new regulars, which is really nice, and people who would have been coming to the talks in our annex. It's a really nice mix of people. And so thanks again. Until the same time next week, take care in solidarity. Very best wishes for Working Class Movement Library. Bye-bye.